got that down. Want to make sure because I almost had to change the title there. And once again, it's our episode three of our music discussion here. Another look at the swing era from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s here. And once again, myself, Dr. Earl, and Arknolia Stroke of being here are here once again, folks. You know, I know the one thing I gotta realize. I'm going to probably have to post it on Twitter that you and I are going live on my channel there because it sets up where you're able to go live in 30 minutes, like JB's show, Joe's show, Ken's show, and any other shows like Drew's show. But sadly, it doesn't do that on my end, so I don't know what the fuck is do about that there. But so I'm gonna have to post it on Twitter an hour, actually a half hour or hour ahead of time before we go live, so we can let everybody know that we're ready to roll here with this program.
Yeah, it looks like you've already got a couple of some viewers.
Yeah, good. I got six people on live right now. Shout out to those people. So tonight we're discussing. We're actually continuing our discussion about the 1920s, 30s, and 40s jazz music, swing era. That kind of like was a breaking point in the swing era around that time because at that time the music was a lot more happier. It was a lot less disgruntled. If it was a sad song, you really felt the emotion that the singers were singing, whether it's Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, or Ella Fitzgerald, or you felt what the player was playing, usually on the piano there.
Yeah, we had just gotten done with the depression, the Great Depression at that time,
Yeah,
and music kind of helped
actually,
to get through that.
yeah, but actually, it was I guess it was during what years were the Great Depression? I know it took up much of the 1930s there.
Yeah, it started in 1929.
Yeah, and it lasted about I guess it was 1939 or something. I believe it did, or
Yeah,
if
it
my
went a pretty
memory
good
serves me
while.
well.
Well,
Yeah, it's about
obviously I
almost.
wasn't around then.
Yeah, well, neither was I, but I remember reading about it in a history class in high school. What a bummer period that was. I mean, everybody was out of work. The stock market crashed. The bottom fell out, and everybody was struggling. People were lined up to receive loaves of bread out there. There were a lot of soup kitchens there and here and there set up.
Yeah, it was a hard time.
I know. I know it was very disgruntled, and a lot of times we almost came close to it during the Obama administration. When you really think about it, everybody was on food stamps, everybody was receiving unemployment or welfare. Not a lot of people were working at that time to support themselves or their families. I was one of those guys back in Michigan. I remember that full well.
Yeah, yeah, that whole time was not a whole lot of fun because of that. It was hard to work.
And the worst of it yet, not even the president or anybody out there could do something about it. I think it was Franklin D. Roosevelt was president at that time, if I'm correct as well.
Actually, he became president right after it started.
Oh, wow. So I imagine there was a lot of blame thrown at him for everything that was going on, like everybody does nowadays. They blame the president for this. They blame the president for the war. They blame the president for the stock market crash. They blame the president for our rights being taken away, blah, 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 and that kind of stuff. I can imagine they were doing that back then to him.
Yeah, I'm sure they were.
Yeah. It
But
was it seemed kind of, but at least we had a lot of countless music that was, to help us through, to help us get through the times. We touched upon it on the last episode that we touched particularly on this subject, but it was good. We had a lot of good jazz stuff that was coming out there. Like I mentioned, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, J.J. Johnson, a lot of jazz artists. Ella Fitzgerald, as I mentioned before,
right.
Charlie Parker, the Bird, who, by the way, the movie biography about him, won Clint Eastwood a NAACP award, if you remember, a few years back.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I know some of the singers back then, like Al Jolson,
Yep,
Billy Murray, and
Bill
then
Murray.
we kind of talked a little bit about that before, and we mentioned Bing Crosby.
Yes,
He was kind of the advent of the crooners.
yes. Yeah. And speaking of Al Jolson, you know, how would Al Jolson, if he were to look down today and see all these blackface references concerning Ted Dancing at Whoopi Goldberg's roast back in '86, or the Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Trudeau, dressing up in the blackface and sort of costume party back then? How would he feel? Would he feel like, oh God, what have I created?
Yeah,
What have
because
I
he was one
done?
of the big ones that did that back then.
I know. I was like, they tried to do that nowadays. Like you'll be called a racist, you'll be called a bigot, you'll be called everything under the book there.
Yeah, and another one of those big singers later. I'm not. I guess I'm drunk on the subject a little bit.
Mhm.
Was obviously Frank Sinatra.
Oh yeah, you
He
know.
was really big.
Oh yeah, big. I remember there were a lot of cartoons referring to him, as one of the great ones. How every time he sang, all the girls would be going crazy, running to him. He was like one of the big teen idols during that period there.
Oh, he absolutely was. He was the Beatles of his time.
Yeah, and it just reminds me of a singer named Johnny Ray. Do you remember hearing that name years back?
Yeah,
I guess I remember he was a UK singer, if I understand, who kind of like broke a lot of ladies' hearts with his melodies, his singing. I guess he was like the teen idol of England back then, towards in regards to Frank Sinatra of that era, if I recall there, because I
right.
remember that there was if you remember the Dixie's Midnight Runners video for "Come On, Irene," there was the poor old Johnny Ray sang a song that broke a million hearts, I guess, along the way. And there was a
Yeah,
lot of footages from women holding up photographs of him, all lined up all together in a big crowd. I guess he was like one of the big deals over in England, if I'm correct.
yeah, I believe so.
Hmm.
And there was also other people like Doris Day,
Yeah. Hmm.
and then the one that was on the Jack Benny show, and I'm trying to remember his name. I think it was Dennis Day.
Dennis Day. I think it was Dennis Day, if I remember.
Yeah, he was a pretty much regular on the Jack Benny show.
Yeah. Well, speaking of back then, we also got to touch up on this. Back then, characters like Rochester,
Oh yeah,
Amos and Andy, they were like, they were well known as well. But back then, they were like treated as lower class, if I was correct.
uh, to some degree, but not as much as people would have you believe.
Yeah.
They were well,
Or the people today, I would say.
yeah. The people today think they were mistreated,
Yeah.
but Rochester, for instance, on the Jack Benny show was actually treated well. Jack Benny's chauffeur, but he was treated
Treated
well.
pretty well, yes.
And then
Along the
Amos and
set
Andy
by the
was
crew. Yeah.
well, basically the story of. I think this was set in Harlem,
Yes.
and I've seen a lot of the episodes because it was still going back in the day when I was around. And it was kind of sad because when they got it removed and it
Yeah.
couldn't be shown anymore, the
Yeah.
actors in that thing got really upset about that because they were losing their royalties.
I
They
know they
weren't
were.
getting the money for the show anymore, and it
Yeah,
really
because
upset them.
yeah, so man, and I guess this was back then when you stopped working, you earned no money in general, whether you're an actor or a singer. If I take it, there were no contracts where you were able to see pensions after you quit performing and stuff. If I'm correct.
Yeah, for the most part, that's
Yeah,
true. But yeah, those guys lost out on royalties and such, and they weren't
a
real
lot
happy
of
about
money,
that.
a lot of money there. So now are they? I was wondering, are the relatives and descendants of those two guys, are they now getting royalties now, or are they still fighting to get that money? Because I imagine they probably filed some sort of lawsuit against the producers and the studio company that produced those TV shows and back then.
I don't think anything ever came of that because basically you only get royalties if the shows are played on TV
Mhm.
or
Uh, yeah,
DVDs or things of that nature. So,
yeah, because
so
I remember Christopher Knight, who played one of the, who was in the Brady Bunch. He said he doesn't receive hardly any money for those times that the Brady Bunch episodes get played on syndication television.
yeah, it's a tricky, it's part of the contract and it's kind of tricky actually how that works. I'm
Yeah,
not sure how it works because obviously I've never seen a contract.
yeah,
But Amos and Andy, it was funny because I don't remember which one of the two, but one of the two of them became a minor character because they had a third guy in there called Kingfish that became pretty much the major character because he was a wheeler dealer and in a way kind of ran things.
yeah.
So, like I said, the show wasn't, I didn't, well, I can't speak for other people,
That's
so,
true.
I'm just going to say that if what they believe is how it was for them, then I say, yeah, okay, then that's good. That's, then, then it was okay to ban the show.
Yeah.
It's just
Well, I
hard on the
wonder if
actors.
I was wondering if there were any. But of course, back then there was no outcries or racism back then by the people. They just had to just had to deal with it. I guess. What I understand there.
Yeah, the outcries for that show came around in the 60s and 70s, and those shows were in the 50s. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, and I know it earlier on in a decade earlier, Susan B. Anthony led her campaign for women's rights because back then, women were not allowed to vote and shit like that. Women were just going to sit there, be the wife, make the dinner, and all that jazz. While the man went out and worked and did his thing here and there.
yeah, and that wasn't right. So,
Yeah,
that was a good thing that happened.
yeah. But then again, you also got to remember a lot of time, there was no laws about child abuse back then. There was no,
Right.
I don't think there was any, there was not even a law, there was not even laws saying you can't, domestic dispute laws out there. So back then it was okay for a guy to smack his woman around if she got out of line there.
Yeah, and that's that I that wasn't really right. So, I
No, it wasn't.
understand that.
Yeah,
But as back to some of the music.
yeah,
Um, that was also the era that we talked about before. We had the swing bands such as Glenn Miller,
yep,
Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey, Benny
yes,
Goodman, Artie Shaw, and people that
yeah. All those acts back then that were really, really at that time they were like the rock stars of that period
oh, they
because
absolutely were.
yeah.
They had a packed following, a lot of people.
Hmm. It's kind of what's even more interesting is that despite the fact that all these stars they didn't really live in mansions, what I understand, like now the stars nowadays do.
No, they didn't. They did well, but they didn't do like today.
Yeah, I know because a lot more. I guess it's because of those situations and those rules and those earlier contracts that all the stars of the day learn from all this, and they also learn by what the music acts from the 1970s, like Black Sabbath, Peter Frampton, the Grand Funk Railroad, hearing about how they were ripped off by their agents and their managers. That's why they decided, to get down and start demanding more money, more creative controls, and all those things included because, a lot of times, many of the stars, many of the acts, whether it's music, movies, or TV, you know, they disappear and we never hear from them again. We don't know if they're living in a nursing home or they're doing well or whichever.
Yeah, some of them did end up in nursing homes, but
Yeah. And I remember there was a lot of blues artists, so a lot of back then that really kind of like had financial issues as well. But
right.
so far as what I understand, the only one that really was able to keep his money tight because he didn't really spend a lot of money was John Lee Hooker.
Yeah,
Apparently, what because back then you get some money, you grow up in the projects, you earn a record deal, you make a few bucks, so singing for this record label, you're doing some shows, you earn money here. They go out and go crazy, they spend like crazy, and they find out when their career's starting to die, they don't have no money left because they're not thinking about that. They're thinking about, oh yeah, I could finally get all the things I want all at once, yay! But you got to think about the future, ladies and gentlemen.
right. And that's
Yeah.
kind of good advice for everybody.
Yeah. And also read the contracts very carefully. A lot of these, I don't know how the contracts are set up back then, but nowadays it's best to read them all because there's always that one clause telling you the producers, the record labels, the television studios, or the whoever, your managers, all are entitled to earn more than you do. So
Yeah,
you got to do that. I remember
that's what
Tony
happened
Iommi from
with, well, you mentioned Grand Funk. That's what happened with them. After they did
yes,
all that huge stuff, they ended
yeah,
up broke because their manager ended up with virtually
yeah,
everything.
yeah, Terry Knight, and he did sue to get off that contract as well. In fact, I remember I was sort of talking about this with YR. Black Sabbath were going through a lot of management issues during their 1970s heyday. In fact, some of the songs on the album Sabotage spoke about that pretty well there.
Yeah,
That's
actually,
which
the
is
album name itself pretty much spoke of it.
Yep, correct. All right, so the movie now, what would you consider would be one of the great prime, recordings of that area from that era?
Well, obviously, White Christmas by Bing Crosby was huge.
Man,
In fact, I think I read that it was the all-time best-selling record of all time.
no surprise,
No,
because after all, it was played a lot of times on, still played on what around Christmas time
oh
during
yeah,
with these soft rock stations playing Christmas music all throughout November and December up until the end of those 2 months.
yeah. Did you ever see the movie White Christmas?
Like I don't think I did, yeah, but I
Yeah,
don't
that
really
that
know much
starred Bing
about it.
Crosby and I believe his co-star Danny Kaye. I don't remember who the female leads were.
Oh wow,
Uh, it was a big movie back then, or
yeah,
it was a big movie.
yeah,
And he also was in a movie called Holiday Inn that was similar but slightly different. And Fred
yeah.
Astaire was in that one with him.
Mm-hmm.
And then he
No,
did a third one called, I believe, The Bells of St. Mary.
uh,
That's a pretty good movie where he played a priest.
yeah. And of course, we cannot forget one of the most iconic movies from the 1930s, The Wizard of Oz,
Well,
with
yeah,
Judy Garland.
yeah,
It's kind of funny. The movie was not a big success when it first came out in theaters, but yet, in time and time after being shown on TV, years after years after years, and kind of the audience for that movie grew and massively grew as well. The
yeah,
song "Over the Rainbow" was later covered by a singer named Sam Harris back in the '80s. One of the first winners from that show, Star Search, back in that era, the 1980s.
yeah. That movie was iconic for a whole lot of reasons. What was
Yeah,
interesting about it, well, when I first started seeing it, I had a black and white television, and it was when we got a color television that I got to see the bit where it started in black and white, and then when
yeah,
she opened the door in Oz, it suddenly went color, which was kind of
yeah,
like, whoa, that's kind of cool.
yeah. It is. It is because I don't think any movie up at that time, I guess until Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs were in color.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, I remember when Walt Disney used to have his weekly Sunday night show, they always said brought to you in living color or whatever, because there were a
Yep.
lot of shows that were still in black and white at that time.
Yes. And it's also even more funnier is that the around that time there was hardly any there was a lot of during the Second World War. There was a lot of black and white. I guess some of the paint that was used to do the color cartoons back in that period was being used for the I guess can you explain that story a little bit me more because you remember at that during the World War II period, a lot of cartoons like Bugs Bunny, Popeye, and all the others had were mostly were in black and white. Well, I guess
Yeah, a lot of the early cartoons were, especially Popeye. I remember a lot of those were in black and white. A lot of the later Warner Brothers. Well, I don't actually remember. Yeah, they did have some black and white ones. I take that back. Some of the
yeah,
early ones before Bugs Bunny, when it was basically Porky Pig and Daffy Duck, because they were the first two main characters that I
mhm,
remember, and
yes,
some others that were kind of disappeared.
yeah,
Yeah,
and of
but
course,
we can get into that when we talk those kind of cartoons. But
yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
there's a ton of pretty good Warner Brothers cartoons to Looney
Oh
Tunes and
yeah,
the Merry Melodies.
absolutely. I remember there was I remember there was at 6 a.m. in the morning I would get way up in my way as a kid, just to watch those cartoons to see how they were, how the art was, how the animation worked, the storylines, how they were than the ones that I used to see on Saturday mornings because that was a whole separate era. That was, I believe, it was in the I guess in the 1950s and 60s. That the main ones we saw with Yosemite Sam, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig,
Yeah,
all those
of course Bugs
characters.
Bunny,
Yep,
Foghorn Leghorn,
yep.
but oh, and
Chicken
Sylvester,
Hawk.
yeah, and Sylvester the Cat and Tweety Bird,
Yep. Oh yeah. I
but
believe. Yeah. Go ahead.
Roadrunner and the
Oh yeah,
Wile E.
that was my
Coyote.
favorite. My dad. Me and Dad were watching one of those Roadrunner cartoons, and he was like, he was like, that coyote, he can never win. No matter how he tries, he cannot get that bird. No matter
Yeah,
what. No matter how many products he got mail order, no matter how many explosive devices, no matter how many attempts, no matter even if it meant painting a tunnel upon a brick wall or something like that,
yeah, the Roadrunner would
could
go through it and
just
he couldn't.
never he could never win no matter what. My dad would remark that has got to be the biggest loser ever.
Yeah, there was times that you were sitting there wishing, I wish he'd catch him once.
Yeah, but then again, but if he did, there would be no more
That,
Roadrunner cartoons. That'd be the end of it. There you go.
yeah, yeah. Well, back to our music.
Yeah.
You mentioned Ella Fitzgerald, and I think
Yes.
you mentioned Billie Holiday, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, we did mention that the last time. Lady sings the blues.
Yeah, and then there was Louis Armstrong and Nat King Cole.
Nat King Cole. Yes, we got to give it up to him because prior to him becoming a crooner, he did lead a jazz trio that recorded a few records on the different label. I know the compilation of those recordings, I guess, came out in the 1990s or 2000s, if I remember.
That sounds about right. But yeah, he was a big one too.
Yeah, he was like one of them. His one big hit. What is that one called?
Rambling
That
Rose.
Rambling Rose. That was one of them. Um, what was that one? Imaginable that him and his daughter Natalie would redo together through digital technique, I guess it was.
Yeah, because obviously he was already dead at that time.
Yes, it
But
was. His daughter would later pay tribute, if you know that album. Unforgettable. That's the name of the song.
yeah, and actually it's kind of ironic because Elvis Presley's daughter did the same thing with Elvis Presley.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, because I remember she had a recording contract for a few years herself. She came up with some interesting stuff around that period, the 1990s there.
Yeah, And then after that, we kind of talk a little bit about at that time the country or cowboy songs. And you had
Mhm.
people like Roy Rogers and the Sons of the Pioneers,
Jimmy Rogers.
and then yeah, and Gene Autry. And
Yep.
Roy
Hank
Rogers and Gene
Williams.
Autry both had
Oh
their
yeah,
own TV shows.
we can't forget Hank Williams Sr.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
we got Hank Williams as he was known back then, but I guess now he's going to be Hank Williams Sr. because of Hank Williams Jr. and Hank Williams the third.
Yeah. Then you had Ernest Tubb.
And Bill Monroe, from what I understand, he was around that doing some stuff at that time, if I'm correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that Hank Williams had some really big stuff. I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry is
You
big,
know,
and a lot of people
your
do it.
cheat, lot of your cheating heart. That
Yeah,
was one of them. I tried to learn that song on a guitar with that one time. I had a sheet of its music, and I tried to learn it, but I don't think I had the trouble trying to. I forgot what trouble I had with it because this was around 1978 when I was learning to play the damn thing. So
well, I
I
know the
had to
chord
what
progression is relatively easy, but it's the
yeah.
lead parts that get kind of,
I have to listen to that sometime, when I'm not doing anything. That's for sure.
yeah. But
Because
that,
it's. Go ahead.
but there were a lot of odd and end people back then. That there was Kitty Wells. Let's see who else.
Was Patsy Cline around that era as well?
Actually, I think she went into the 50s, but she might have started in the late 40s.
Oh,
But
may
I think she
possibly.
went into and she had some great stuff.
Oh yeah, Crazy, which would later, which Willie Nelson would later cover years later.
Right, right.
And she was also a topic of a movie. I guess it was called Sweet Dreams with Jessica Lange playing her. I guess if I recall.
I think so. And if you saw the Loretta Lynn movie, what,
Oh yeah, Coal
Colm,
Miner's Daughter. That's
of course
probably
she
what
was
the
in there because they were good friends.
yeah. Yeah, her and Sissy Spacek, who played her in the end, and probably kind of like Loretta Lynn. It's kind of like a Tina Turner back in her time because she was living there with an abusive husband at that period there, and
Right.
basically she was able to rise above that situation to become a country music legend.
Yeah. And then you had the Carter family.
Oh yeah, featuring, of course, June Carter, who would later become Mrs. Johnny Cash.
Right. Then you had Eddie Arnold,
You know, yeah, I remember hearing
Tennessee
that
Ernie
name.
Ford.
Oh yeah, one of the prime Christian singers out there. My dad had one of his records just as well. And of course, let's see. There was so many there I forgot there. I couldn't forget. I was going to think about that. Never Promised You a Rose Garden, but that came out in the '70s, if I remember.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that was Lynn Anderson.
Wait, Linda. Yes, there you go. I remember that name.
I have to think about him sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of that. And of course, you got to remember a lot of those night those country artists back then would later be the groundwork of country acts for the later today. A lot of the country acts of today, even though they're more poppy, more mainstreamish, they do look up to artists such as Johnny Cash and Jimmy Rogers as their inspirations.
Well, that's kind of why we're talking about this because, as it turns out, a lot of people, even through today, will count as their influences stuff they either grew up with or they heard. So they kind of, they do mention that as their influences.
Yes.
Even people like, well, we discussed this before, the Stones and the Beatles,
Yeah.
they were influenced by the early stuff.
Yeah. And I understand there was, we cannot forget the blues period of back then as well. Son House, Charlie Patton, Robert Johnson, were the big ones there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
But
Robert Johnson's either the one that wrote Crossroads or he's the
inspiration for
inspiration
Crossroads.
for Crossroads.
Yeah, because we all know the story. He goes down, meets at this area crossroads. He makes a deal with someone who's supposed to be the devil.
Right,
Makes a deal for his soul, for fame and fortune and such, and dies. All of a sudden, he only recorded about 29 recordings, and then there was supposed to have been a third 30th recording, but according to the movie Crossroads with Ralph Macchio and Joe Seneca back in 1986, and it showed this, kind of showed a young man from the young teenager from that period, instead of being into stuff like Pretty in Pink or the new wave at that time, or the heavy metal of Iron Maiden and Judas Priest at that time. He was into the blues. He was learning all that good stuff there with him and his acoustic guitar and his slide bar on his fingers there. Probably
right.
the biggest memorable moment of that movie was him trading licks against the devil, played by Steve Vai.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's probably one of the biggest performances in Steve Vai's career, other than him working with Frank Zappa, as well as his records as well.
yeah.
But lot of stories about Robert Johnson that are still fluctuating today. Some people would say he was like the original musical devil's child, for what I understand, because of that story about him doing that.
Yeah, it's a pretty well known fact that Eric Clapton was a huge Robert Johnson
Oh
fan.
yeah, absolutely. But then again, who wasn't? I mean, Robert
True,
Johnson was like one of the big wigs of the blues era. I mean,
absolutely.
a lot of the blues artists at that time, like John Mayall, um, the Stones, Led
Right.
Zeppelin, they looked up to blues artists like Willie Dixon.
Lead
In
Belly.
fact, Lead Belly, yes. Muddy Waters, Howling Wolf.
Right.
You know, Sun House. That was his name, Sun House. In
Yeah, there
fact,
there were a lot of great artists that I'm going to advise the audience if you get a chance, look some of them up and play them, and you'll be amazed at how really good these are.
they were absolutely, because these are like way ahead of their time. The recordings and the sound quality may or may not be that good, but you could feel the emotion that they were pouring into those songs. Because a lot of them had lived the blues. A lot of them were going through hard times. A lot of them had their hearts broken a lot of times.
Oh, Bo Diddley.
Bo Diddley, yes, another rock and roll pioneer. It's kind of funny, guitar. He had the rectangle shaped guitar.
Yeah.
The company who made that guitar still makes that guitar today. It's the Bo Diddley signature. What's the name of the guitar company? Gretsch, if I understand.
It could be Gretsch. I don't remember for sure.
It's spelled Gretsch.
Yeah, that's Gretsch.
Scratch. Gretsch, yes. It was like it's like one of the iconic guitar companies out there. It's like one of these, I gotta mention this. One of these days, I would like to try out the Gretsch White Falcon that Billy Duffy plays from the Cult. You
Yeah.
remember the video? Remember the video for a Love Removal Machine and how he was playing his Gretsch guitars, whether it's the black one or the white one?
Yeah.
Him in his tight blue jeans and that denim vest that he was wearing. That to me is the ultimate rock and roll image right there.
Yeah.
Right there, folks.
Didn't they also do Sanctuary?
Yes, She Sells Sanctuary, which came out a year earlier, 1985.
Yeah.
Still played at its radio at certain goth clubs to this day.
Yeah. Well, there's songs that stand the test of time, and
Yep.
they get played. But yeah, what's interesting is later on there are artists that got a hold of some of these old blues singers and played along with them. The one I can remember for sure is Canned Heat did an album with John Lee Hooker called Hooker and Heat.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Canned Heat, I got to give them acknowledgement because they did a lot of blues song.
Oh, they
Did a
were
lot
big
of
time into that.
Big, yes, absolutely there.
And
And
yes, we will discuss canned heat.
yeah, when we talk about our blues special coming up pretty soon there,
Yeah, although they were basically a 60s band.
they were, yeah, but then again, so were bands like Black Sabbath when
Yeah,
they started out in the '60s. They had a
late
blues number
60s,
themselves.
but still.
Yeah, of course, John Mayhall and his Blues Breakers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, featuring of course Eric Clapton as well.
Yeah, I think he was only on one album, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, of course, that Irish guitarist that made a lot of records in the, I guess it was the '60s. He's no longer with us. Rory Gallagher.
Oh, yeah.
He picked up on the blues a lot.
Yep.
Gary Moore as well. He started becoming. He did his a few rock records that went on until he went to the blues side, and that's when he became more successful.
Yeah, and Robin Trower actually kind of dabbled. Well,
Oh
it's
yeah,
it's like we said, some of these guys don't stay in one genre. They play
no,
throughout genres.
yeah,
They'll let's do a little blues, let's do a little rock, let's do this. Hi, I want to try some prog. That kind of thing. There's a
Pat
lot of them that
Benatar.
did that. Yeah, Pat Benatar did that kind of thing.
She did a blues album back. I guess it was in an what was it, 1990 or 91 or a couple years earlier. Dad, I think I forgot the title of it,
Yeah,
but
and of
dang,
course we
damn
did
it.
we did mention Neil Young went all
Oh,
over the place.
oh
I think
yeah.
he tried every genre.
Yes, he did rockabilly, the electronic scene, the blues with Neil Young and the Blue Notes. That and this notes for you. We were discussing
Right.
that now on
He
one of
did
our shows there.
psychedelia. He did
Yep,
prog. I mean, you name
he
it, he
did
did
some.
it.
He did some heavy rush shit with that old guitar, rusty guitar sound he had on stuff like Rust Never Sleeps, Reactor.
Right.
I still want to know what kind of devices, what kind of pedals he used get that particular sound. Because for years, was infatuated with that particular sound. Look
Yeah.
up the album Rust Never Sleeps,
Oh, that's a good
Reactor
album.
from 1980, and you'll see that the sound of guitar that I'm talking about. That sound it was like rusted, it was like grungy, it was like, but it sounded, you couldn't help but stop listening to it the way it was played.
Yeah. Well, when we get to that era, I hope we can spend an entire show just on Neil Young,
Oh
because
yeah, we should
it'll
do
take
that.
that long to cover
We,
him.
we, I know, but we're going to, it'll probably be in a couple of weeks because we still got the '60s and '70s and the '50s to cover on this series here.
Right. And when we get done with the 40s, next will be the 50s.
And I guess
And we'll
which will
kind of
be this. Go ahead.
talk about in general and touch on a few artists and such, but there's going to be some of them that we want to pretty much devote the entire show to. And the
Yes.
one that comes to mind, in my mind anyway, is Elvis Presley,
Oh yeah.
because he's definitely worth covering, because he was a inspiration for lots of artists.
Well, very inspiration. Him and the Beatles there.
Absolutely.
If it's to say that him and the Fab Four were like the two main pioneers of influencing kids to either sing, play guitar, make music there.
Oh yeah. I mean, the Beatles were obviously trendsetters,
Oh yeah.
and in a way, so was Elvis.
Absolutely. Yeah, they both were in the prime. People debate who was better, the Beatles or Elvis Presley, the Elvis Presley or the Beatles. No, let's look at it this way. They both are equally trendsetters and big pioneers on the generations to come when it came
Absolutely,
to making music of their own.
no doubt.
Yeah. All right. So I guess, if it's to say that the scene of the 1920s, 30s, 1940s as well, it was a lot of swing stuff. It was the rock and roll during that period. But the difference is there were no riots, there was no bottles being thrown on the stage, there was no people cursing in front of their audience like some of the singers do or the artists did back then. There was none of that. Everything was spot on,
Yes, some of this was the genesis of rock and roll, but they hadn't got to the point where they were calling it rock and roll yet. That didn't
Yeah,
come to the 50s.
yeah. I don't know if they even called it the swing era back then, swing music,
Yeah, that might be the label that we've put on it
or other people
later. Yeah,
as well. Because when you look at it, I don't think they had really any genre terms at that time there.
probably not other than general ones. They didn't get specific like they do now. But we also had some folk music then. The only one I can think of off the top of my head,
Woody
i
Guthrie.
that's the guy.
Yep, that's Woody Guthrie. Mister, this land is your land.
Right.
Yeah, the man who will later be a groundbreaker for inspiring Bruce Springsteen,
Yeah.
because he was one of the big protesters back then. He was the one that was calling out for people, the employees, to get unions for them, and of course, a lot of people did not like him because of that.
Yeah. He was
Not a
a.
corporation.
There's a word
One
I'm
of the
looking
prime,
for.
one of the prime protest singers out there,
Yeah.
protesting, the way the working man was being treated.
Yep.
Yeah. And I guess something we also got to cover in the near future, and when we get to the '60s, was the '60s folk explosion with the Kingston Trio, the
Peter, Paul, and
Smothers
Mary.
Brothers, Peter, Paul, and Mary. Um, um, Later on, Phil Ox, but that was mostly in the 1970s. Joni
Yeah.
Mitchell.
Yeah. And actually, Bob Dylan started as a folk
Yeah.
singer.
It's also a bit fits to say that Bob Dylan was also the person responsible for electronic folk music. We were
Yeah.
talking about the Byrds earlier. Everybody knows this story. Bob Dylan goes on stage with an electric guitar, and the audience boo him for that because a folk singer was not supposed to have an electric guitar. But one of the people who found out or was at that performance was a guy named Roger McGuinn,
Right.
who I guess got the idea of no, this guy probably has something here. Let's go try it over on our band there. And next thing you know, the Birds were born.
And they early covered, well, throughout their career, actually, they covered Dylan at
Yeah.
least once or twice an album, and in some cases more. So they based, well, like you mentioned, Mr. Tambourine Man, which is
Yes.
interesting to hear the Dylan version and then their version.
Yeah. Because I guess their version gets more played than Bob Dylan's version. And when you think about it, it's still played
Oh
on
yeah,
the
which
still
is
played on. Go ahead.
which is basically the case with most Bob Dylan songs. If somebody else covered it, they did a job, well, for lack of a better word, more commercial.
Yeah.
Uh, that got played,
Yeah.
and the
And
Birds. That's one, and of course Jimi Hendrix played all along
I
the
was gonna say
Watchtower.
that. Oh yeah, and plus his version of "Like a Rolling Stone" for that Monterey Pop Festival that came out in a couple of years after the actual event. One side was Hendrix's performance, and the other side was Otis Redding's performance from that particular show there.
Yeah, and when we go into Dylan, we not only can talk about what he did,
Hmm.
but the many, 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 many covers that
Yep,
that
many people have done of his songs.
right, because he was
The time,
covered
a lot
probably
of
more
people.
heavily than anybody else,
Yeah.
except the Beatles. They were covered pretty heavily too.
Oh yeah.
But
Oh, we,
the covers of the Beatles songs generally didn't do as well as the Beatles songs.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the Beatles were like they picked up on the stuff there. They really were in. As I mentioned, I think I guess last night, while everybody was buying, Little Richards, was that one Great Golly Miss Molly, and
Right.
but yet hiding it in the dresser drawer because they didn't want to be caught having a record by a black artist. They would say they would prefer Tutti Frutti. No, wait, it was Tutti Frutti that they were talking about. They would have Pat Boone's Tutti Frutti. They would play that a lot. And then they would keep Little Richard's Tutti Frutti in their dresser drawer. They keep it hidden.
Right.
Yeah. But then again, the Beatles were one of the first, white artists to come out and say, "Hey, we like John Lee Hooker, we like Chuck Berry, we like the Isley Brothers, who at that time was around way before the Isleys that we knew in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s,
Right.
before Ronald Isley became Mr. Biggs in the R. Kelly videos and duets there." And they basically said, "Hey, this is the music we enjoy. We like these black artists. We like, and we're not afraid to say it." I mean, Little Richard even quoted saying, Paul McCartney was the only one that could do the woo that like Little Richard would.
Right. Yeah, and as much the innovators as the Beatles were, they still had the influences.
Yep.
It's pretty much the case with, well, most
Yeah.
artists for that matter.
Yeah. That's kind of funny, there was a guy who sang for a band called Little Caesar around 1990. Basically, it was a rock band, heavy tattooed rock band with goatees, massive long hair, looked like they belonged into the biker gang. They would do versions of songs like Chain of Fools that Aretha Franklin was doing at that time, years before.
Right.
And basically, and the point that the singer was trying to make was, people talk about people being influenced by Eddie Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen talks about how Eric Clapton influenced him, but nobody really talks about who influenced Eric Clapton.
He was influenced by a lot of the early blues artists, a lot
Yep.
of them.
Yep.
In fact, the story about him being, because his first exposure to playing out was the Yardbirds,
Oh yeah.
and he supposedly left the group because they were getting away from the blues and he wanted to do the blues.
Yes, and it was going towards a more pop commercial sound at that time.
Yeah,
And of course, it was later given, but then again, without the Yardbirds, we wouldn't get no Led Zeppelin.
true.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, Jimmy Page would join the band as the bass guitar. Later moved on to guitar as well, along with another guy named Jeff Beck, who we know.
Yeah, the Yardbirds are pretty much, I'm going to say well known, but probably not, that
Yeah,
they gave us three of the greatest guitarists of all time.
yep,
One time or another, Eric Clapton was in the group. Jeff Beck was there a long time, and
yeah,
Jimmy
that's
Page
true.
was a long time. And like you mentioned, he was the bass player till later on. They did a double lead sort of thing.
Yeah, and here's something else I got to throw in here. I know it's kind of related, but you know the song "Dazed and Confused" by Led Zeppelin from their first record.
Yeah, that was an old blues song that
Yeah,
Jimmy
the
kind
act
of said, "Hey, it's mine," but it's not.
actually what it was actually a folk song performed by a guy named Jake Holmes in 1967 on one of his records. And what it was is that the Yardbirds were doing a show with Jake Holmes. Page listened to him perform that song and
And
told the Yardbirds, "Hey, let's do our version on it." And he was only able to do a live version on a British, not excuse me, French music program there, and it was sounded similar to the Zeppelin version, but with the original lyrics. But then when Zeppelin decided to record "Days of Confused," they added new lyrics to it, but it was still the same, approach that they did with that they borrowed from Jake Holmes. And now today's when you look at the reissues of the first album, it says written by Jimmy Page, inspired by Jake Holmes among the credits.
yeah, and if anyone wants to listen to that Yardbirds version, I
Look it
believe
up
you
on
can find
YouTube.
it at YouTube. Uh,
Yes, it is on YouTube.
and it's
There's
not
a
called
few.
Dazed and Confused. It's called I'm Confused.
No, actually, no, it is called "Days of Confused." Believe it or not, same as the Jake Holmes song.
Oh, okay, because I had the record at one time
Hmm.
of that live performance, and I thought it was I'm Confused.
Yeah,
Actually, that performance is pretty good. The whole concert's actually pretty good.
yeah,
They do some of their old stuff and things of that nature.
yeah. No, but in fact, it was one of the first times on those on the show that I mentioned about the French TV program.
Right.
It was actually it's one of the first times we saw Page use that violin bow on his guitar there. which
Yeah,
I tried to do a lot of times but couldn't do it because I didn't have some sort of wax to do it with.
right.
Yeah. I guess it's resin wax if I'm correct.
I think
I
they
got
call
a
it resin.
resin wax, I guess.
Yeah,
I gotta look at if next time if I ever get a chance to go to a music shop, I will ask about it.
yeah, because a bow, from its very construction and what it's made of and such, has to
Mhm.
have resin to s-
Yeah,
glide smooth across the strings.
yeah,
Of course, that's something a violin player would know.
yeah, exactly. And sadly, I don't have a violin. I just learned
No,
from Jimmy Page here and the sounds he could create there. It would
yeah,
be cool if he had to, if I had my own little echo tremolo system up there, recreating some of that sounds he did on those or on the studio version of Days Confused there. That was pretty some outlandish stuff there. Wow, that was a trip to listen to, man, back then.
oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so back to our discussion here. I think we got a few minutes left here on this program here.
Okay,
Yeah. What time did we start? About quarter after 6, I believe. If I'm correct there.
yeah, somewhere around 10 or 15 after 6. I don't recall the exact
I
time.
do. I don't remember. I was like I said, I had a lot of stuff to do, so I had to get ready at the last minute. Including the thumbnail that I'm using right now. Is not according to the subjects here, but I just threw it on there because it looked kind of cool there.
Yeah,
Hope people watching enjoying it. And by the way, someone I gotta mention out here as well. Um, this coming Thursday, we'll continue our music discussion in the 1950s. There, and I know we discussed that. We'll be discussing acts like Dion, uh, Chuck Berry, all the rock and roll pioneers, like I guess Sammy Davis in the '60s, from what I understand. Now I was going to mention those guys.
yeah.
Yeah, so many we gotta
Dean
look up
Martin.
there. Dean Martin, yes. The Brat Pack.
Oh,
No,
there's
that
another
excuse
guy
me,
from the
the
40s.
Rat Pack. My apologies, folks. I get the two mixed up.
Well, one more guy that I'm going to mention from the 40s is Tex Ritter.
Tex Ritter. Yeah, I remember hearing that name many years back.
Yeah, and actually, he's the father of John Ritter.
Oh wow, the late John Ritter from Three's Company and those other sitcoms he did. That's something there.
Yeah,
Of course, we cannot forget Carl Reiner. I guess it was.
right.
Was that in the 1960s or the 30s or 50s, if I am correct? Because I remember him
60.
in 1960s. Yeah, the 1,000-year-old man. I guess was his most famous, comic piece there. If I understand, with what was
Mel
it, Mel
Brooks.
Brooks that he worked
Yeah,
with?
yeah,
Yeah.
and he also
His.
was responsible for the Dick Van Dyke Show from that period of time.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was in the 1970s, if I remember. Yeah. Of
No,
course,
that's black and white. That was in the 60s.
oh yeah, oh yeah, I'm thinking of the Van Dyke show that
Right, there
aired
was
on
another one later.
NBC back in the 1970s. Gummit.
Yeah, the 60s one had Mary Tyler Moore, him,
Yep.
Maury Amsterdam.
One.
Oh, what was the girl's name?
Mm-hmm.
Sally.
Sally Field,
No,
the Flying Nun.
no, no, no.
Sally. Damn it.
I can't believe
Sa-
I can't remember her
Sally
name.
Sally Kellerman.
No, not her either. And it may not even been Sally. Sally may have been her character's name.
Mm. I'm not too sure. I'm thinking to myself there.
Rosemarie.
Oh yeah, Rosemary. Yes.
Uh, that was that was a good show. I don't know if you ever saw it or not, but it was well made, really funny, and it was a good show.
Mm. Yeah, I remember there was a lot of time. I remember my parents used to watch it a lot of times, many times there.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and tell people what we're going to be doing
Okay,
tomorrow.
yeah. Tomorrow
Tomorrow
night
it's the Star Trek, the original series. We're going to
we'll
start at
be
season 1 and see how far we go with the discussion on that one.
yeah. I'm going to let mostly Arknolia take control of that one because I didn't really watch many episodes of Star Trek there. You'll probably, in fact, my best friend Dennis, who lives in Utica, Michigan, will probably be geeked up for this episode because he is a massive Star Trek fan.
Well, I'm hoping that I'll inspire people that haven't seen them to see some of the episodes.
Yeah, because
Uh,
a lot of times we get to all these, because a lot of them only know the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Discovery, Enterprise, and the new one, Lower Decks.
right,
That the comedy, animated comedy series that we mentioned yesterday.
right.
Yeah,
And then Thursday, we are going to start an hour early. We're going to start at 5,
yeah, we're going to
and we're going to
continue our
start with the 50s.
yes, we're going to continue our music discussion of going back to the 1950s with the artists that we were talking about. We're going to be discussing that period of time.
And then on Friday, we're going to kind of talk about Plan 9 from outer space.
Oh yeah, the Ed Wood movie that we mentioned earlier that we said it was so bad it's so good to put forth.
Well, it's one people need to see just to go, I can't believe that was made. Yes, it
Yeah,
was.
yeah, yeah. So we got a lot of stuff coming up for this week here, folks.
And
Definitely up to
one of the things I'll mention is in the comments, you might mention some things along the lines of the subjects we're talking about
yeah.
that you might think, well, that'll be a good one. And we'll see if we can get to it, if either
Yes.
one of us have heard of it.
Yeah, definitely. We
Don't
could
get
probably
too
look it up on
obscure.
the internet. Yeah, but then again, we also welcome obscurity.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can tell you some obscure movies that are, for lack of a better word, laughable. I don't see how MST3K missed them.
Um. Yeah, it's pretty much. Yeah, no. One of these days, I'm just gonna probably get a hold of a couple people, Kevin Hamilton and Bobby McMillan. I haven't heard from those guys in a long while. There, see how those cats are doing.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
see if we can't get them to just kind of listen in, and if they can help, join in if they want, if
Oh,
they
we
can
could probably.
contribute.
Like tomorrow I'm going to be spending a few days with my nephew once again. Yeah, he's going to leave me to take care of the house while they go on a trip. So I would definitely bring my computer over there, and I will definitely do a show from my nephew's place there.
Okay, yeah,
Definitely
that's fine.
tomorrow there. Yes. So that's it for today. For Argnolia and myself there. This is Dr. Earl. This is Dr. Earl episode. No, actually, excuse me. Argnolia and the Doctor, episode 3. And we look forward to, what was it, episode, was it TV Memories, we're going to call it?
Yeah, TV memories, and this will be number 2 because
Yeah,
Doctor
another
Who was
episode.
number 1.
All right. TV Memories, episode 1. We'll definitely look at that.
2.
Definitely. We'll call it that. That's for sure. Episode 2, Fine Bad. And for myself, once again, everybody have a good time. Thanks to everybody who watched this particular show, and thanks to everybody who watches later on after it uploads. There.
Absolutely.
All right. So
And go
for
find my
my
channel. Although right now all
it's
I've got
sub
is
to
the
it as
same
well.
shows.
Sub to it as well. And sub to my channel as well. Spread the word about our channels here. Support the YouTube community, and that's pretty much about it for now. Till tomorrow night. You guys take care.
Yeah, and have a good night and a good day.
All right there. Bye bye, everybody.
Bye now.